Throughout human history, nations have come and gone, but the most enduring leaders remain etched in our collective memories. Some are known for their military might, others for political prowess, still others for the great works and cultural events they oversaw. In this edition of The Biggest, we are taking a look at the most powerful leaders in the history of the world. Charlemagne. King Charles I, better known as Charlemagne, was king of the Franks starting in 768, king of the Lombards starting in 774, and the first Holy Roman Emperor from 800 until his death in 814, meaning that he ruled as emperor for almost 14 years and as a king in one form or another for 46. Charlemagne has been called the father of Europe since he united most of Western Europe for the first time since the original Roman Empire some 400 years before, and united parts of Europe that had never been under Frankish or Roman rule. After his death, emperors of the Holy Roman Empire considered themselves successors of Charlemagne, as did the French and German monarchs who came after. Charlemagne is remembered to this day as the founder of the Holy Roman Empire, a proponent and champion of European economic and political advancement, and a driving force behind the cultural revival known as the Carolingian Renaissance that saw an uptick in pieces of artistic importance being created under his rule. Augustus Caesar. The man for whom the month of August is named, Gaius Octavius Thurinus, later Augustus Caesar, ruled as the first emperor of the Roman Empire from 27 BC to 14 AD. Emperor Augustus enlarged the Roman Empire by annexing parts of the world all around the entirety of the Mediterranean Sea, from present-day Spain and Gibraltar all the way around to present-day Egypt and Turkey. But his conquests were secondary, as his reign was mostly a peaceful one. He reformed the Roman tax system, led the Roman roads building initiative, created the cursus publicus courier system, established both a standing army of the empire and the now famous elite Praetorian Guard, created the first Roman police force and firefighting services of Rome, among his myriad accomplishments during his 41-year reign. His status as the founder of the Roman Principate has earned Augustus Caesar a reputation as one of the most effective and controversial leaders in the history of the world. Elizabeth I. This might be biased towards the modern day and Eurocentrism, but there is no arguing that the single most influential leader in the history of the British Empire was good Queen Bess, the last monarch of the House of Tudor, who held sway for 44 years between her coronation in 1559 until her death in 1603. Among her power plays, Elizabeth established the English Protestant Church and became its first supreme governor, an evolution of the Church of England that exists to this very day. The explorer Francis Drake served under Elizabeth and explored much of the Pacific Ocean and the New World. In the military sphere, England's 1588 victory over the Spanish Armada was one of the great military victories in the history of the British Empire. And culturally, the Elizabethan era is regarded as a high watermark for art, particularly in English drama, with playwrights Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare producing numerous classics. Things got a little shaky at the end of her reign, thanks to the Virgin Queen never marrying or producing an heir. But for the vast majority of her 4.5 decades in power, Elizabeth I oversaw a period of peace, prosperity, and stability. Qin Shihuang. A list of the most powerful leaders of all time would be incomplete without the first emperor of a unified China, Qin Shihuang. The founder of the Qin dynasty, the man born Ying Zhang, became king at age 13 and reigned as king of Qin for the next 26 years. At 38, he became China's first emperor after the Qin had conquered all of the other warring states and unified China in 221 BC, and he would reign as the first emperor for another 11 years after that. His self-invented title, emperor, as indicated by his use of the word first, would continue to be used by rulers in China for the next 2,000 years. He left behind a legacy that rivals any in the world, most notably a series of public works projects, such as how he unified dozens of state walls into the single Great Wall of China, a massive national road system, and a city-sized mausoleum guarded by the life-size terracotta army that stands ever vigilant at his final resting place near Xi'an in present-day China. Louis XIV. The Sun King is a hell of a nickname, and it is reserved for probably the most powerful leader in all of European history. Louis XIV believed in the absolute power of the monarchy, and he meant it, diminishing the power of the nobility and eliminating feudalism in his reign, transforming France into a centralized state. And if we were just talking time in charge, his reign of more than 72 years puts him at the top spot above every other monarch in European history. And for the entirety of that time, starting in 1661, France was the leading European power. The time of King Louis was anything but peaceful, as he fought 3 major wars and 2 smaller ones in a span of 42 years in the middle of his reign, and the French army ballooned from 30,000 to 400,000 in his first 30 years in power. His reign is also associated with the greatest age of French culture and art, founding many official institutions to cultivate visual art, science, dance, opera, and even the French language. He also implemented several trade and commerce reforms and streamlined the laws and tax codes of the nation, all in a 7 decades work for one of the most powerful monarchs of all time. Alexander the Great. Alexander III of Macedon, commonly known as Alexander the Great, was the basileus, or king, of the ancient Greek kingdom of Macedon. He learned under the tutelage of Aristotle as a young man, and after ascending to the throne at the age of 20, Alexander oversaw perhaps the greatest expansion through military might and conquest the world had ever seen. Though only in charge for 13 years, those 13 years saw Alexander overtake lands from Greece all the way to India. He founded 20 cities that bore his name, most notably Alexandria in Egypt. He was so wildly successful that instead of his campaign for world conquest ending as a result of a loss of a battle or death, it was the homesickness of his troops that eventually caused Alexander to call off his campaign for world conquest. He died on his way back home to Macedon while in Babylon, where he planned to make a new capital of his empire. Incredibly, Alexander was undefeated in battle, an astounding feat considering just how many battles he took part in, and he is still looked at to this day as one of the greatest military minds and most influential figures in all of human history. Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Elder was the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, the first Persian Empire, and that wasn't the only flowery nickname bestowed upon the great leader. King of Anshan, King of Persia, King of Media, King of Sumer and Akkad, and the King of the Four Corners of the World were all titles that Emperor Cyrus II of Persia was called during his life and after. Under his 30-year rule from 559 to 530 BC, the Persian Empire coalesced all of the previous civilized states of the Near East and expanded and conquered most of Western Asia and much of Central Asia from the Dead Sea to the Indus River, creating and controlling the largest empire the world had ever seen up to that point. He's also remembered for his pioneering of human rights, his prowess with military strategy, and his influence on civilization as a whole. Cyrus was the first major world leader to truly honor the local traditions and religions of those he conquered, rather than imposing upon the survivors, which was wildly successful for establishing a government as vast as his. The Persian Empire expanded further after his death, a credit to his skill as a leader and the policies he implemented. King Nebuchadnezzar II. For 43 years, King Nebuchadnezzar served as the monarch of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, making him the longest reigning and subsequently most powerful of the historical kingdom from 605 to 562 BC. Nebuchadnezzar fought several campaigns against nations to the west, including the Kingdom of Judah, which is described in the Old Testament. The Bible also remembers him unflatteringly as the destroyer of Solomon's temple, also known as the First Temple, and the initiator of the Babylonian captivity of Canaan from Jerusalem to Damascus. During his rule, the capital city of Babylon saw great growth and prosperity, which included the creation of the famed Ishtar Gate, processional way, and possibly the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Though of course the Hanging Gardens are the only one of the 7 wonders whose existence is disputed because no archaeological evidence has been found of them. The city fell to the Persians 30 years after Nebuchadnezzar's death, and efforts to restore it by Alexander the Great could never elevate it back to the heights it had known under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II. Pharaoh Ramses II. Perhaps no series of leaders, when put together, commanded more power than the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, and of them all, Ramses II was the most powerful. As the 3rd pharaoh of the 19th dynasty of the Great Nile Valley civilization of northern Egypt and the Middle East for a whopping 66 years, the god king named User-Mater-Seit-Penre oversaw a period of prodigious growth for the Egyptian Empire between 1279 and 1213 BC that would be its historical apex. During his reign, Ramses took control of lands as far north as the Levant and Canaan, and as far south as Nubia. It grew so expansive, in fact, that the capital was moved from Thebes to a new city called Pi-Ramesses, which was built to better manage the ever-expanding civilization, and which at its peak had a population of more than 160,000, making it the biggest city in the world for a time. He was lauded among Egyptians, who called him Ramses the Great, and reveled by rivals such as the Greeks, who translated his first name User-Mater into Ozymandias, the tyrant Colossus, a moniker he earned thanks to a 57-foot-tall statue that once stood in Thebes that he commissioned of himself to commemorate his great legacy. He is regarded as the greatest, most celebrated, and most powerful pharaoh of the period of time known as the New Kingdom. His successors and later Egyptians called him the Great Ancestor. It's no wonder he appears so high on the list. We have just one ruler to rule them all at the top of our list. Any guesses before we see who takes the top slot of our top 10 most powerful leaders in history? King Hammurabi. Hammurabi tops our list, and for good reason. 1,000 years before Nebuchadnezzar, Hammurabi served as king of the first Babylonian dynasty for 42 years, from 1792 to 1750 BC. During Hammurabi's more than 4-decade reign, he brought nearly all of Mesopotamia under his rule by conquering several civilizations and city-states across the Middle East, from present-day Syria all the way to the Persian Gulf. Hammurabi was seen by many as a god within his own lifetime, and after his death, Hammurabi was revered as a great conqueror who brought Babylon victory in war as well as civilization, peace, and perhaps most famously, justice. The Hammurabi Code, a Babylonian code of law, is the oldest known set of laws that punishes the perpetrators of crimes rather than simply compensating the victims. It prescribed specific penalties for each crime and is among the first codes to establish the presumption of innocence. To this day, nearly 4,000 years later, Hammurabi is still regarded as an important figure in the history of law and history's most powerful leader. That's our list of the top 10 most powerful leaders in the history of the world. But we want to hear from you. Who are the leaders you expected to lead our list? Leave your entries in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please do us a favor and give it a like, a comment, a share, and subscribe to our channel. And we'll see you next time on The Biggest.